Good, you good.
How's it going?
It's good, man. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Good, good. All right, so we're here recording the eighth episode of the Rappad Podcast. We're here with Hyde. Hyde, why don't you tell them what you do?
I do everything.
All
I
right.
do absolutely everything. I mix. I play around with producing. Primarily, I started out at least as a rapper and a singer, and so I do anything and everything.
Why don't you talk a little bit about all the work you've done on Ratpad and all the people you've worked with?
Yeah, for sure. I think I joined Rappad. I don't even know, forever ago, 2014, 2016, something like that. It's been forever. Um, I've had a chance to meet a lot of cool people, work with a lot of cool people. I started out and I joined, and what I was really looking for was a producer to work with, um, as a vocalist, to have somebody, sort of a collaboration where, somebody that I really vibe with that could help me develop songs into fully fleshed out tracks. In retrospect, I was nowhere near good enough to even be thinking about that, but that's why I joined. One of the first people I remember talking to was Nick Grace, uh, which was a lot of fun. Um, but since then, I've had an opportunity to work and do features with a bunch of people, to help the site with some blog posts and stuff like that. Uh, Participated in a bunch of competitions, did a bunch of stuff, and so many of my best musical connections, people like you, Mike Parker, Roan, all came through Ratpad. And so, even though it's a weird site and can sometimes be a little bit obnoxious, I definitely love it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, this is definitely like a recurring theme for all of us. I think really it comes down to when you provide a space that's meant for um, different people because not one thing isn't going to work for everybody. So I think like
For sure.
Genius has forums, and other places there are forums, but they're not in the format that like people like us really want to deal with. So having a different kind of space with different tools and like having the cipher right there on the website was, I think, a kind of gravity for people. It
Absolutely.
it creates a situation where people just kind of run into each other. Because I was telling Nick Grace, who I just did an episode with like an hour ago, that when you when you come onto the site, you kind of don't expect much, and especially when I came in 2016. I wasn't expecting much, and there was one point where I was like geeking. I was so excited to see like in this little corner of the internet you can find like incredible talent.
It is so true. And I think one of my favorite parts has been watching artists grow and develop. It's really cool to be able to say that, like, artists like Kid, I remember when Kid was absolutely trash and he worked so hard and got so much better. And that was so much fun to watch.
Yeah,
And I mean, that goes for just everybody, for
yeah,
Roan, for Nick Grace, even like Dom and Had, who were beasts even when I showed up. Like, they've just got so much better.
yeah,
Um, and it's a really cool environment. I think I like how small it is, kind of how close knit it can be.
right,
Um, it never feels like there are more than 10, 20 really truly active people. Um, it's kind of a cool place.
yeah. And I think it speaks to something that a lot of us don't realize, that the bar, even for small timers, is much higher than we would like to admit. So
Yes.
you put yourself out there and you connect with people, and there's usually, I think this applies more in the beginning when you first start doing it, and then you start to love it after a while. But your heart drops out of your chest. You're like, I'm not anywhere near as good as all these people that I'm running
Yes.
into. And in the beginning, that's kind of like, shit, I don't know what I'm gonna do. But after a while, you learn like it really comes down to how you receive that and how you respond to it. Because if it just drives you,
I entirely remember you being an absolute asshole,
yeah,
like when
yeah.
you first arrived,
Oh yeah,
which
yeah,
was
yeah.
hilarious.
Yeah, I was gonna say that too. You don't have to leave me out of it. Like I was pretty bad when I showed up, and then it wasn't that it was funny. I felt like I had a good grasp on certain things,
You
but
definitely did.
I just like I was in a box in that kind of sense. And when I showed up, I've said this a few times. It was kind of the mentality of when you go to prison, you got to pick the biggest dude to pick a fight with, and
It was
I
ill
know.
words, right? You
Yeah,
tried to
yeah, it
start a fight
was.
with him.
Yeah, it was. It was. And I remember when I came in, I noticed that people were battling and doing this whole thing, and there was a part of me that's like, man, the best battles, the most entertaining battles I've ever heard were the ones that they did it on a beat and they actually had a flow and they put it into a tempo and really gave some melody to it, and it kind of adds like a more emotional, like you have to be a lot more genuine emotionally when you do that. So when I found out like there was a dude like Ill Words actually dropping that kind of content, I got really excited, and there's a part of me that was like, I just want to get in on this. And my diss wasn't serious at all. It was like, it was kind of flowy. It had a terrible theme. But the diss that Words came back with was absolutely priceless. It was hilarious. But
I mean, he was a beast. I wish that he was still online more than he is, but
yeah,
he's just an incredible artist.
yeah, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. The only thing was in the beginning, I wasn't on good terms with everybody, and I think that there's something to be said about knowing your social skills through and through before you decide to take something so seriously. But in the spirit of like how things went for me, I kind of just did what I had to do, and I learned over time. You know what I mean? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And I mean, you've grown a lot, not only as an artist, I think, but as a person, which has been cool to watch too. Like,
yeah,
I remember being moderately annoyed with you, at least initially, on
yeah.
like the forums and stuff, and like now you're one of my favorite people to talk to. So
Yeah, and you know what's funny is back then I used to, anybody would call me out, I'm like, you have no idea how annoyed I am with myself. Like, you just, there's no way that you could tell me more than I've told myself. And
I feel that.
that speaks to, it just takes time to learn things, even if you know you have to learn them. Like, you do have to put in the time to experience them. Um,
Definitely true.
so I was really willing to make a fool of myself, even though it kind of like stung like a bitch, especially when you have those moments where you do grow and you look back, and that twinge on the inside, that cringe that's just like, oh God, I can't believe I was saying dumb shit like that like a year ago or 2 years ago or whatever it is. Um, yeah, it's a process. It's a
I think that's
process.
true for anyone out there who's being honest with themselves anyway. So
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
not unique. I periodically look back and I'm like, damn, my ego was huge.
One of the cool things about like being willing to make a fool of myself and still be an artist while I'm growing so intensely is as I change as a person, because I've from like kind of early on I've been working to make my artist persona like a direct extension of who I am, rather than just like a persona that I project out, but rather it's like literally me just in a different form. And so doing that over and over again, eventually it teaches me to be willing to change on an artistic level. So if I hear something and I'm like, God, I just don't fuck with this anymore, there's no part of me that's arguing like, no, I'm just making that shit up because I'm afraid of what the haters are gonna say. Like, no, I know for a fact when I hear something and I'm like, I don't really know if I'm gonna fuck with this in a few months. And sometimes that happens in hindsight. But being willing to tear shit down, that's definitely a skill I learned, because I was keeping my old shit up for probably like the first year and a half, 2 years, and then I was like, no, there's no logical reason for me to try to flex any of this work, or think that like I should be proud of it. I should absolutely move on and set a new standard. One thing I feel like people don't speak on is that when if you're putting yourself out there and you have old music that you really don't like, and then you're marketing it to fans, now they're going to have a certain expectation of you just as a person overall, based on what you've said in that work that you feel like doesn't even represent you anymore. And there's definitely a bar or a point where it's like, if you make music from a certain genuine place, and you're okay with the flaws to keep it up, but then there's also like, if you feel like it's not quite who you are and you were doing one thing because you thought it would be popular or whatever, and it misrepresents you, I feel like it's okay to take that shit down if you're small time.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, it's it's one of the things. I have a bunch of friends who are artists who are just perfectionists, and like it takes them forever to put something out, and like they send me the same verse 47 times over the course of 6 months, and it's like, just drop the damn track.
Yeah.
Like no one's there looking for it. I know this because no one's there looking for my music. Like, in the grand scheme of things, none of us are big artists. There's no expectation. Any expectation that you have, you're putting on yourself. And giving yourself that out, saying, like, listen, if 6 months from now you come back to this and you're like, not feeling this, this wasn't really what I wanted to say, it wasn't really how I wanted to say it, fine, get rid of it.
Yeah.
There, the stakes are really, really low, especially when you're a new artist. And the thing I think you should be focusing on primarily is improving. And the way you improve is by doing it.
Right.
The more you do it, the better you're going to get.
Right. And then as you go on, as you get more serious, there's an element of learning to let things simmer for as long as they need to, rather than being so excited to put it out. Like, it's okay to share it. It's always good to have a circle of friends to share things with, and I think that's something that a lot of artists kind of struggle with, because they want to put their music out for the people who do know them, but then they don't consider, like, anybody can walk in and listen to that, and if their ears aren't in the same place they're going to be in a couple months, when they're thinking, like, I don't really know if I fuck with this. Like, you just have to give it a little time so that you can make a proper judgment on yourself.
I think that's definitely true. It's something I've never been really good at, but like, in retrospect, like, there are a couple of songs that I go back to and I'm like, damn, I killed that. That was phenomenal. But most of them I go back and I'm like, yeah, probably should have changed that line. Probably should have tweaked that a little bit.
Right.
And I think it's not just constantly working on it. Like you said, it's being able to set it down for a few weeks, couple months, come back to it, listen to it again, hear it like you're a new listener. Because, once you get in your head and you hear how it's supposed to sound, it's really hard to hear how it does sound right now.
Right. That's true. So, and all the time that you've been doing this, have you been on Ratpad for kind of the duration of, like, you being a recording artist online, or does that predate?
That definitely predates Ratpad. I started recording probably when I was 15 or so. I was really awful. By the time I got onto Ratpad, actually, it's the first project that I have out that is still semi-available. That is pretty decent, and I won't take down, and I'm not ashamed to, like, have people listen to. And I just made that when I sort of discovered Ratpad, and so I was a decent recording artist even then. But I've definitely grown a lot since then.
Right. So in all this time, what would you say your proudest moment as an artist is?
My proudest moment is, that's a really, really hard question. And it's something that changes constantly. I think when I released End of the Beginning, which was the last sort of project that I released, it's only 5 tracks long. But it turned out really, really well. It turned out pretty much exactly like I wanted to hear it. And while it could have been better, there were some things that I wish were better. In the grand scheme of things, I think how that EP came together and how it sort of just... that was the first thing that I got done with, and I felt like I made something that was really, honestly good. And I think it's that sense of personal accomplishment is really what gets me. And so that I'm really proud of that EP still to this day. And that's just releasing that and seeing the reaction to it, which was all very positive, was definitely one of my prouder moments.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, I like that. It's I say this a lot, and I've been saying it since the beginning, and I think it's one of the things that really set me ahead from the start, was that I had an understanding of making music that you yourself are impressed by. Because if you can't impress yourself, then why are you expecting to impress anybody else? And it's just like, it seems like it would be logical, but it's interesting that there are a lot of artists out there who kind of put the rose-colored glasses on them, and they decide if their music follows a certain template, that there's wiggle room for them to think, like, no matter what it sounds like, it's going to sound dope to the fans, which um, in the long term, when you turn around and those glasses finally come off, you see like you were just kind of regurgitating whatever it was you kind of thought was right. Whereas when you can really impress yourself and you find yourself very proud of the sound and the representation of who you are, that's when you know that you're actually onto something.
I think that's definitely true. But that's also just a great point. It's one of the things I periodically have people come to me and be like, "Oh, I've got this connection, and like I'm gonna get this track in front of J. Cole or like whatever great artist that is gonna be awesome." And I've taken to sort of telling people like, "Listen, you're not ready for that. Like, if a connection like that is ever going to work for you, the only way it's going to work is if you give them something so unbelievably good that they just stop dead in their tracks." And 99.9% of artists just aren't there with anything that they have. But if you think about it, like how many songs, like I'm around music, right? I listen to tons of music on Ratpad, not very good music mostly, but like I listen to lots of artists. Lots of artists send me their songs and I listen to them. And 99.9% of the time, I listen, give some feedback, and move on. Maybe it's good. Maybe it even impresses me a little bit. But unless it just absolutely blows me away, I'm not coming back to it. And so I need something that, like, 3 days later, I'm still humming the melody of the hook, and I'm like, man, I got to hear that again. And
Mm.
that is so hard to do. But the standard is not. It's not like make a polished piece of art. It's not make a good piece of art. It's not make something that impresses you. It's not even make something that your fans like, although over time that can build and grow, but it is make something unbelievably good. Because when you look at, I mean, like Kendrick Lamar is a great example of this. Just he's unbelievable. He is utterly unbelievable.
Right.
I don't like his beat choice, his instrumental choice, and so I don't love listening to him. But every time that I sit down and actually listen to him, it's nuts. I'm nowhere near that level. I don't know many artists who are. And so when you think about like what is it going to take for you to stand out that way, it's that. You have to be that fucking good.
And I think something that we don't highlight a lot is a process of like hip hop critics will do this a lot, and it's good if you're an artist to follow people who really know the culture and are able to break it down in very technical terms. But it's important that you understand why they're exceptional,
Yeah,
and that it's different for every person because every person is unique. But then it also falls into the same kind of categories of skills and ways of applying those skills, like music
that's
as a. Go ahead.
that's just another thing. That was one of the biggest lessons that I remember learning. So Rick Ross in the mid to late 2000s was stupidly popular, and he is one of my least favorite rappers, and I hated him, and I could not understand why he was popular, why he had so many fans, so many people listened to him, so many people wanted to listen to him, because the thing that I was focused on was flow, and the man spit 16 notes like repetitively, just over and over again. He's on a loop. It's terrible. It's awful. And eventually, I sat down and I was like, okay, stop saying that you hate him and figure out why it is that people like him. And when I listened for that, when I tried to figure out why this artist that I don't like is successful, I discovered that, not that shockingly, Rick Ross has this ridiculous voice and a ridiculous delivery, and that is the reason why he sells. Like, is he has this sort of gravitas to him that even though nothing he's doing technically is terribly interesting, he as an artist still manages to be interesting. And so every time I see younger artists saying like, I just don't get it, like I don't get why anybody likes artist X, go listen to artist X and figure out why people like them, because undoubtedly that artist is doing something much better than you are.
Right, and for everybody who's made it anywhere significant in the industry, there's some skill set that they're so good at. It carries them through, and it doesn't matter if they have sonic skills. They could be terrible at flow, they could be terrible at lyrics, they could be terrible at delivery, but then they're great at following a certain culture or understanding that culture, representing it. They might be great at getting out a message or agitating people in the industry and getting attention. So there's always the element of the more you pay attention to what's going on and why people are where they are, the more you can actually learn the skills that make it tick and then plug them into your artistry. Like for
Exactly.
me, I'm strongest with lyrics. I'm strongest with, or I'm most my highest affinity rather is for lyrics and for flow and for tonality and things like that, and instrumental choice and having like very not necessarily airy but certain types of beats. So I have to focus on um, things that really apply to those. And if I'm like learning about how sort of X and his confidence and his attitude, the way that he displays his anger and things like that, really are what allowed him to express himself in the way he did, and especially being so versatile and being so honest, even if it was ugly. So
Yeah,
learning that, then I can sort of take that as a lesson, like, okay, so this is a kind of foolproof way to be connecting with large groups of people, even regardless of the subject matter, because you can still find a market depending on what you say. So you take that lesson and then you just
totally.
say, so if I'm just fearless in my music, past a certain point, I still do believe like I wouldn't have wanted to be fearless in my music when I was 18. Because the shit I would have had to say is just absolutely not worth saying. But then now
Yeah,
that I'm this age and I feel that, um, I wouldn't call it a necessity, but kind of like gravity to be like, I want to really have that impact whenever I represent myself. Like you just, I don't know, it's just a process of continuously learning deeper things.
absolutely, man. And like you said, every artist out there is doing something right. And if you
Yeah,
figure out what that something like frequently, if there's an artist that you don't like, it's because you aren't thinking about whatever it is that they're doing well. And so just trying to figure out what that is gives you a whole nother element, I guess, to work on or to work with and to figure out. And like I said, that was the case with me with Rick Ross, or even, I don't know, just every artist that I've looked at that I've been like, I don't really like you. When I sit down and try to figure out what they're doing, my own artistry gets better.
exactly. Yeah, because you learn that there you have to have an understanding of every pillar of the foundation of whatever it is that you're doing. Um,
Totally.
like this comes up a lot. I used to say this a lot, and I think it was because the people I was saying it to, it just comes off as like, well, don't tell me what to do. But in general, when you approach something as like, I know this is going to work and get me rich, and this is the one thing that if I just put all my chips in here, I know it's going to work. And you end up with no longevity. You might click into the game for 4 years, 6 years, whatever it may be. You might scrape stardom, but there will be a point where the times shift, and sometimes they shift very suddenly, and you'll
Yeah.
find yourself without the skills to keep up because it's a totally different fusion. It's a totally different social standard, a moral standard, whatever it may be, and people get left behind like that. So you have to be able to sort of analyze the things that are most important to you in a way that you can absorb something useful. And there's levels to that as well. That it's not just cut and dry, like you see what you see and then you learn what you learn. Like there's actually a process to learning how to learn effectively, and that really comes down to
Definitely.
I wouldn't say judging yourself against others, but rather judging yourself honestly based
Yeah.
on based on the bar that you set. Like that's why I say influences matter, because if you're obsessed with Kendrick or Chance from like Acid Rap and 10 Day and Coloring Book, if you're obsessed with Lil Wayne from his old days when he was a lyrical monster, and you're
Yeah.
you're setting that bar for yourself, when you listen back to your own music, if you're truly honest, you're gonna be like, man, this shit is not like I don't want to listen to this. Like I can't
Yeah.
play this more than a few times without getting agitated. So you have to be like, I'm not where I fucking want to be. And in the beginning, it's like it's frustrating to the point where it feels like you're being attacked by yourself almost.
Yeah,
Yeah, as it takes time. It takes
I think
time.
that's yeah. Everything you said there, that makes it's a lot of sense, right? Like you have to push yourself, and I really like the idea that like you're not comparing yourself to other artists is sort of a bad idea. Not in the sense of critiquing yourself against other artists, but like trying to be better than so and so. Um, and I think you also have to come to a point. I think back up a little bit. Two things I think that I've realized. Um, First is that I don't want to be better than Kendrick, uh, because Kendrick is really really good at being Kendrick. And I'm never gonna be better at being Kendrick than Kendrick is. And so trying to be the best version of myself is really sort of what my goal is. Instead of trying to be better than everyone else, uh, trying to find your own space and trying to find your own sound is really important. And then I think secondly, getting used to never being satisfied with where you are as an artist. Still, every song I make, every single hook I write is better than the last one. And I've learned something new and I've added it to my arsenal of what I can do. And so every just finding that balance. When you start out, it feels like you are attacking yourself, like you're just criticizing yourself constantly. And eventually I think you come to terms with the idea that you aren't aiming for a goal that's attainable. It's always just better than. And so that makes it a little bit less confrontational, I guess, with yourself, that you're pointing out ways to get better and stronger next
Right.
time, not inherently trying to tear yourself down.
Well,
It's the opposite.
I had a similar conversation, but more broad and metaphorical, with a friend of mine that maybe the whole point in life is to judge yourself. And that, like, if you look at the sun literally is burning itself. Like it literally, it fuels itself. It is the thing that is burning, and it is burning itself. And so I think for people, it's the same thing, that you, in order to shine like that, you have to actually be burning yourself and willing to do that. Because when it comes from other people, you're at war, and when you win, then you've just won against like people that you might want to have good relationships with. Whereas with yourself, it's much easier to forgive yourself when
Yeah,
you're the first and last say of like, I'm the one who's saying my shit is terrible. I don't have to hear it from like my mom who's gonna break my heart, or my dad or something. And of course that takes time. You have to learn. You have to learn that your taste isn't all that, and that you can always have a better taste, and that you can always find ways to sort of expand your palate, and that it
absolutely.
changes, and it always changes your perspective about like what is good music, what constitutes good music, how can music get better, what can I even do with my current sound, how could I make it different, what could I do in the future. Having a bigger vision is what really allows you, I think, to go somewhere like grandiose. Because people talk about illusions of grandeur, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. That there are people who kind of still are stuck on that whole trope from the 2000s of fancy objects won't make you happy, like that whole meme. But there's also an element of there, or not fancy objects, but like lots of money and being
Right,
famous,
right, right.
and being successful, and your dreams are just misleading you, and that whole kind of trope.
Yeah,
But I think it comes down to everybody is meant for something in their life, and they don't always realize what it is because they're busy going off of what other people have told them. But that doesn't mean that when you really desire to be famous, or to be on, like, be a parallel to Kendrick Lamar, or be a parallel to Drake, or something of that nature. Um, when you challenge yourself to like really dig into what constitutes that and how would I feel about it, and you're always still like, I still want this, I'm still hungry, I'm still growing, that's when you know it's meant for you. So I think it's a two-sided coin. Like, being great is not really an example of grandiosity. I think it comes down to who's willing to work the hardest, and that really determines who wins.
Absolutely, man. I think firstly, to get really nerdy, you talked about the idea that like we're kind of meant to, not just in music but in all aspects of our lives, judge ourselves. um I mean, going all the way back to like Socrates, who told us that an unexamined life's not worth living. Like I think that's just the same idea, that you ought to constantly be checking yourself and seeing where you're at and where you need to improve and how you can be better as a human being, as an artist, as whatever it is. And then at the end of that, you hit like one of my favorite points ever, which is the idea that hard work wins. I don't know. I think it's culturally something about our culture. We really don't like talking about work, and we really, really like talking about talent or being gifted or whatever that is. And there are absolutely people who are talented and gifted at various different things, music, sports, whatever. But there is no one who is at the top of whatever it is that they're doing, whatever profession it is, whether it's sports, whether it's being a lawyer, whether it's music, whatever it is, who did not work their ass off to get there. Like, I think that is something, again, we just miss way, way, way too much.
One thing to consider is that with talent and skill, I believe that they're the same, and that there's an example of one, people from the outside looking in, falling into senses of jealousy will tend to paint it as something easier than it is. So talent is a great word to sort of tack on there and be like, they're just using their talent to get through life, and I have to build everything from the ground up. But the fact is that when they were growing up, they were taught everything as if it's their first language.
Yeah.
So then there's also an element of the people they grow up around, like kids at school and stuff like that. You end up having a lot more attention when you have a talent or a skill that you can show people as a kid. And a lot of people will tell you you're unique. They'll tell you you're skilled. They'll tell you you're talented. I know, because I remember school. I remember when there was a kid who could drum or the kid who could sing or whatever, and all the kids would kind of like look over like, how do you do that? And it's always like, it's this running joke. So I think it just comes down to sort of a thing that we do in society, is that we paint things as being easier than they are and more
Definitely.
quote unquote mystical. I think that there's an element of kind of learning things and expressing yourself is mystical, but that it's not illogical. Like, there's a way that all this stuff works, and if you can if you pick it apart, then you realize there's actually nothing separating you from Kendrick Lamar and all the things he knows and he's capable of, except for you. Like, whatever thing you think he does that you can't figure out, it's just the fact that you've literally already put up a wall. Like, I don't know how it works. I can't figure it out. But if you spend the time, like, one thing I learned is that if you try to sing along to the lyrics of people like Chance and Kendrick, who do fast or melodic or very conceptual, like slow bars, and you try to do the tones and the inflections, you have to learn the words. You have to connect with the words, and you have to connect with the story, and you go into this rabbit hole where you have to learn what they learned in order to actually do it all the way. And that's why you don't see people, like literally anybody, just singing along perfectly to a song or doing a cover the next day. You have to learn it. You have to understand everything that went into it. And it's really, it's funny. Like, as long as you have examples and influences to bounce off of, you're always going to be able to figure things out. You just have to use your actual brain.
I mean, I think that's another really great point. Like, people don't want to study. And I remember, like, I've got a pretty decent flow. I've tamed it down some because I wanted to make more mainstream music than more out there stuff. But, like, I remember I reached out to this guy who did a bunch of like music notations of rappers' flows. He's got a great blog. His name's Martin Connor. But I talked to him for a while, and I actually sort of got some lessons around doing this. And one of the things he had me do was sit down and notate flows for different rappers and like work out what they were actually doing. And like it's an entirely different world when you sit down and you like actually try to plot out exactly where those notes are and exactly what they're doing. You learn so much more. And even now, like it is almost impossible for me to passively listen to particularly rap music. Like I'm always listening to the mix, I'm always listening to the way the lyrics fit together, the flow, like the delivery, what are they doing. And I think that there are a lot of artists who start out and like, you know, they've listened to an artist and they like that artist, or they like a bunch of artists and they're like, I want to try doing this, but they haven't really sat down, and most of them never do, and figured out what it is that they're doing. Because it's not abstract. Again, it is logical. Like you can work out exactly why it is that that flow is so damn good. You just have to sit there and work out why it is that flow is so damn good.
And when you do that, when you learn things to that level, and then you go and you learn music theory and rhythm and all these other things, you start to notice that there are connections baked in to everything else, and you start to realize, oh, so that's how, like, that's what this comes from. Like, it's an offbeat 2/4 rhythm or whatever it is, and like it's already written somewhere that this is a thing that you can do with drums, and you just put it into vocals, and then you can realize like anything I learn with drums might potentially bleed into what I know about vocals and writing, and that changes your perspective. So, you know, it just plays further into my whole obsession of it's a bottomless well. That the further you go, the more you learn, the more you realize there are more doors that you can open up to learn more, and it just doesn't really stop going. And again, it just comes down to what you're hungry for. I think the crazy thing is, in the modern era, there are so many of us. We learn so fast, and we've
Yes.
already come so far that the realm of possibilities almost seems to get exponentially larger. Whereas human beings, I guess we do learn to learn faster, but I don't believe in the concept of literal multitasking. I believe that you can do two things alternating really, really fast and really, really effectively. Like when I worked at Taco Bell, I used to have to talk on the microphone, take the order, remember the order, also fill up sodas, put the lids on them, get the straws out, line them up, and then grab bags and fill them up with napkins, punch in the order, take the cash. And I would be doing this all like in succession, like without stopping, completely tying it together. And people would be like, how the fuck do you do this? I remember there were people who took videos of me. I think I tried to look it up at one point to see if it went viral. And it really just came down to like I knew how to do each of those things so well that my mind was able to parse them out into separate bits of focus so that I could do it all at once. But I don't think that there's any such thing as multitasking. So we can learn how to do things more efficiently, but we're never going to be able to do everything literally all at once. And that's something that I feel like a lot of people don't really get, is that even though the world is so fast, there's really only like a few ways that you can approach tackling it, and you just have to tackle it. And there's no end to like all the different examples of where you have to go. Yeah.
I had a professor in law school who made us write the alphabet and then the letters 1 through 20, or sorry, numbers 1 through 26. And she had us at first just write out the alphabet and write out numbers 1 through 26 as fast as you can. And then she made us alternate between the two of them. And like, you are so much slower trying to do both things at once. It's just hard to, I mean, that's something that's undoubtedly designed to be difficult to multitask with, but I agree 100%. Like, multitasking is not really a thing. You can learn to do some things mindlessly and like do something else at the same time, at least a little bit, like, you know, having your hands fill up sodas while you're talking and recording in your brain in order. But you can't focus on everything. It's not possible.
Right.
You can focus on one thing.
Right. And it definitely comes down to focus. It's about how well can you
I'm still here.
Oh yeah, it's about how well you can focus on one thing at a time, and then the more experience you have with that thing, it sort of seeps into your memory as becoming something I don't know if literally automatic is the right word. It's more like whatever you know about it, you don't have to think about it as much.
Yeah,
Your understanding is so condensed that you can just do it with, like, barely half of a thought, and then you can start to do what we call multitasking. Um, so being patient with yourself, because one element that I remember was big for me was like, in real life, it's very normal to be able to, um, I don't know, work at a restaurant or work at a Jiffy Lube or whatever. So it's easy to comprehend. Like, I have to learn this. I have to find a way to make this work inside of my head. Whatever.
yeah,
Whereas when you open up Fruity Loops, you just see like a gray screen with a bunch of words on the side, um, and like some options. And when you open up an instrument, there are all these knobs, and there's nothing in the world that really says like, learn this now. It's life or death.
yeah,
Um, so it's very easy for your mind to be like, this is too hard. I don't know how people do this. But it's the same process no matter what you do, and it's really, I can't say that it really takes longer to learn any one thing. It's just about how big your plate is, and the more you know, I think the more you're capable of doing in this world, as far as I'm concerned.
I definitely agree.
So far, what do you think your biggest strength in music is, and what's your biggest struggle, and how do you balance them?
I'm gonna start with my biggest struggle. That's an easier question. Also, I just want it on the record that Sly gave me all of these questions beforehand so I could think and like have really good answers planned out ahead of time, and I did not do any of that. So you're getting shit off the top of my head. Uh, I think my biggest struggle, at least lately, has been being a perfectionist, especially with my writing.
Hmm.
Um, Trying to find, I frequently come up with two or three lines that I really like, and I don't know what to do with them. And I used to be sort of pretty good about finding something and just moving past it, which I think was a good way to grow. And I've been trying to really solidify getting those lines, getting everything to hit the right way, and it's been a struggle lately. Um, but I'm making progress. Just sort of trying to be a little bit more flexible, do a little bit more with like slant rhymes and stuff like that, being a little bit finding a way to work through or around a problem when I have one. And one of the things that I've definitely learned from that is just that if you have something you want to say, just say it. And while you can't do that every line, or else you'll wind up with something that has no rhyme scheme, no flow, no nothing. Sometimes, if you have something that needs to be said in a song, in a verse, saying it is what needs to happen, even if it doesn't
Get
fit
released.
quite right. Yeah. I mean, no, like even if it doesn't, even if you have a line that doesn't seem to
Oh, I
fit
see.
the right
Yeah.
way, like
Yeah.
it doesn't fit with your rhyme scheme, it doesn't fit with your pattern, it doesn't fit with what you wanted to do there, it can sometimes take you in a different direction and help you open up an idea. Uh, I think one of my biggest strengths is definitely hooks and finding melodies that work really well and sort of helping tie those things together. And I think that I am learning how to rely on that as a strength, just that melodic element, to bolster some lines or some things that I think aren't perfect in verses, and just kind of work out exactly what I want. What I want something to sound like, even if it isn't exactly what I wanted to say, or helping to piece together something that isn't quite working the way that I want it to.
Right.
I don't know if any of that made sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And so, what do you do to balance that dynamic for yourself so that you're always driving forward and staying hungry?
I mean, I think I'm not sure I'm all that hungry at this point. But I think I take what I love doing and I let that push and engage what I'm not so good at. So if I hear an instrumental that I really love, or I come up with a hook that I really love, I'll take that and use that to drive creating a song and focusing on the verses. So if I'm daunted by verses, if I'm daunted by trying to write something that's good enough to satisfy me at any given point in time, I'll start with a hook. Because if I create a great hook, I feel confident that I'm going to have a good track. And so I can take that confidence and sort of turn it into the verse.
Okay. Gotcha. Word. And on that subject, for just as more like a blanket perspective, what would your advice be to people on that, if they're trying to learn and trying to balance sort of what they're worst at and what they're best at, so that they continue to grow and get better?
Again, I think taking your whatever it is that you're good at and doing that really well is going to help you give yourself the confidence to try to push yourself with what you're not as good at. And so if you're not great at hooks, but you create just absolutely fantastic verses, write a great verse. Write a verse so good that you don't need a hook. And then go and try to figure out what's in the hook. And if you're trying to learn how to do something and fill in a strength, the other thing that is really, really important is finding someone who's really good at that and talking to them if you can, but even if you can't, even if it's just YouTube videos or something, like listen, watch, see what they do. What is it that they're doing? Why is it working? Again, going back to that idea of studying, trying to figure out what it is that makes whatever they're doing work. If you want to do something like that, it doesn't have to be the same, but figuring out how are they approaching a hook? What are they thinking about? How do you want to think about a hook? How do you want to do whatever it is that you're doing? Or like for me with writing verses, I really want to have this sort of raw and open approach. I don't really have a ton of punchlines. I'm not really super lyrical. That's not really what I want to do. It's not really where my head's at. But I want something just relatable and sort of, common, for lack of a better, just the way that you talk, the way that I talk, the way that I speak, the way that I interact with people. I want to sound and feel natural in my verses. And so listening to somebody like Kanye, who I feel like has this really engaging way of delivering lines and way of wording lines and formulating lines it feels so simple, but it still comes across as powerful and unique. And sort of studying somebody like that helped me grow a lot and understand how to do what I knew I wanted to do.
And on that same note, there's an element of like managing your fear, just sort of like take on more and more and more and more and more and more and more, because it always seems endless. And I think personally for me, I kind of take it down to a very personal and spiritual level of like, this is life or death. Like, this is my purpose, and if I don't do this, then there's really nothing else for me. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this the best that I can. But of course, everybody's different, and everybody has their own language that they speak when they speak to themselves. So like for you, how do you manage that?
I think there are a couple of things. Firstly, if I'm scared of something, I put it off. I put it off indefinitely. And so I can bargain with myself, for lack of a better way to put it, and say, okay, so you're scared of writing the verse because you don't know how it's going to turn out and you're not confident that it's going to turn out well. So don't write a verse. Write 4 bars. Just 4 bars. Write 4 really good bars, and then you're done. And I'm almost never done after I've written 4 bars, because I sit down and like, if I write 4 good bars, I feel good about myself. I'm like, shit, I should write more. And then sort of building on that little bit that's there. But I think there are points definitely where you just kind of have to push yourself and say, listen, you're going to do this and you're capable of it. Another thing for artists like you and I that have sort of a back catalog of work that we've done, going back and seeing how well I've done. Like periodically I'll just go back and pull out feature verses that haven't listened to in 2 years, 3 years. I have no idea that I did them anymore. And I'll periodically find something and be like, damn, like you're actually pretty good at this. And I think, fear and confidence are sort of on the opposite sides of that spectrum. And so finding a way to remind yourself that you can actually do this thing can be, at least for me, really encouraging. because like I forget I can rap because I sing and I like singing, but I can rap.
I completely feel you, because there's a part of me that, I love rapping, but then I love, I grew up on Radiohead, and I grew up
Yeah.
on like, or now I listen to people like Jacob Collier and Hiatus Coyote, and when you hear that kind of stuff and it blows you away, you're like, shit, I really, really want to sing. And when you haven't written, like for me, I haven't written a ton of singing stuff, so I ring like, or I write like a lot of sing rap, but
Yeah.
as far as like, really melodic, like breakdowns, like let's just pull out the guitar and everything else, the silent kind of stuff, I don't do it a lot. So then I'll tend to get really obsessed, like, shit, I really want to sing. And eventually I realize, well, there's only so much gas that I have into that right now with the experience I have. So after a while, you have to be like, I have to challenge myself to use this vibe on a rap or something. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And on the subject of advice, what kind of advice would you give to people who are struggling with networking and kind of getting along with people on the internet when it comes down to like making connections and reaching out and sort of representing themselves in a way that's genuine, that people can sort of like connect with, because for us, especially when we're starting out, our skill doesn't speak for us completely, because sometimes we're not that good in comparison to this person we want to talk to or something like that. So then social skills really have to come into it. You know what I mean?
I think first and foremost, don't be scared to talk to people. Uh, Most people, you're going to get one of two responses. If you try to hit up Kendrick Lamar, you're going to get ignored. Um, if you try to hit up me, I'm probably just going to talk to you. Uh, I think one of the most important things, and this is just a good marketing thing to know, is that you have to provide value to other people. And so,
That's a
like,
good one.
if you're a producer and you're trying to get into rapping and you come to me and you're like, hey, uh, can I get some feedback on this? I might ignore you, or I'll probably listen to it because I'm absurdly nice and I spend all of my time helping people. But there are, you're going to get a better response if, firstly, you care about the other person, you express that, and you try to give them something of value.
Mm.
Now, for a lot of people, like, it's hard to give somebody something of value, but even just saying, hey man, how's your day going, and actually caring and having like a 3 message conversation about that person, how their life is doing, they're going to like you better than if you, I don't know, randomly drop a SoundCloud link in their DMs, which they will promptly ignore.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. The point of bringing value wherever you go is the biggest one for me. And this goes back into it's not really a meme. It's just more of a piece of advice that people often don't pick up on. That when you're young and you're dating, you don't realize that who you're with, your quality of your relationship is totally determined by the quality of who you are as a person. And you have this high expectation of like, why aren't things great? It's because
Definitely.
you're not great yet. And so when you turn around on yourself and you really focus on like becoming great and the aspects that you can comprehend, at least in that part or that point in your life, then wherever you go, you can offer value. And
Yeah.
you have to be able to embrace that when you're asking yourself like, how am I going to sort of um, find the people in this world who I can actually build with and sort of like come up with. You have to be able to, again, you have to be able to represent yourself in a way that's like, I like using the word transparent, because a lot of people, they want to be loved and they want to be good people, and especially, again, you have to challenge yourself of like, do you really think that you're lovable? Do you really think that you're a good person? If you really analyze yourself, and is there anything there that you really know you should work on? And when you really put in the time to dig at that and find ways to sort of upgrade your own existence, your knowledge of maybe history or psychology or emotions, or how to handle them, or how to take care of yourself, or even just your ability to pay attention. Um, that's what gives you the opportunity to give value, and it's not black and white. There's no list of things that you're going to need to know to go out into the world with. It's going to come down to sort of what life leads you to, I think, and what's really relevant for you, and that's different for everybody. We talk a lot about relevancy in the world, um, and it doesn't really work like that. The relevancy that we see in the media is a reflection of the people, first and foremost. So when you can actually just focus on sort of observing things for what they are, you start to see what you can do for yourself. But it's kind of like it's a very circular rabbit hole, and you can't spend too much time on one thing when you're talking about, like, there's this thing that I can do to improve my life, and that thing. But I don't really look at it as self-help, because I think that this process plays into pretty much every conversation I have, and a lot of times it's not about improving anything, but more so it's just about appreciating the world for what it is, and how complicated it can be, and how simple you can make it. So the more you're able to do that, especially the more that you can enrich your life and appreciate things that you might not have been able to before. Like,
Definitely.
I always knew how to cook, or not always, but my dad taught me when I was 18, and then years later, now that I've become a producer and I really care about taking care of myself and how I feel after I eat something, now I'm like much more obsessed with cooking, and much more obsessed with, like, this oil is not good for you if it goes past a certain temperature, and if you cook in this certain style, then it's going to come out in this way. And, like, for example, one thing that I've never done before that I started doing was throwing raw veggies into a bowl and then the hot rice over it, so that you're not cooking any of the nutrients off of your veggies, but they still get hot. Whereas, like, they don't do that kind of stuff at a restaurant. You can't just learn that out of nowhere. Like, you have to actually kind of go through the process of like, for me, I was just trying to figure out, like, how can I get more energy from my food instead of eating and then feeling tired or whatever it may be, because that shit happens a lot. But it's again, I'm using an example and just kind of like digging deeper into it. I find it funny because it comes off as a meme in some cases, of, like, you're just analyzing everything and trying to find meaning in things. But again, I think that's our job, and that's really what makes life worth it to begin with, is the fact that we give it meaning, and that it doesn't inherently have meaning. Got like really philosophical, a little bit esoteric there.
All good.
But yeah, we've been going for an hour now, so I think I'm gonna let it rest there. Do you have anything planned? Anything that you might be dropping this year or next year that you want to tell the people about?
Yeah, I have a track that I'm waiting on a feature verse for that is fantastic. It's called Testify. I think I shared it with everybody like a year ago, not quite, closer to 6 months. But
Okay.
it is. I'm super proud of it. I'm super proud of how it turned out. It's not super deep, but it's awesome. And then I have another hook that has been banging around in my head for forever. And I sent it to this producer who I'd never heard of before, but Rowan told me to hit up. And 2 hours later, he had one of the dopest beats I've ever heard back to me. And so that will be coming sometime very soon, in addition to a whole bunch of features. So
awesome. And why don't you let everybody know, just in case there's people who don't know your platforms, your handles, what they are.
I am Hyde the Rapper on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can find me. Hyde everywhere else. Hyde is not the most original name in the world. It's my bad. But you can find me. I'm like the third or fourth option on whatever streaming site you want to go to. So I'm that way on YouTube, SoundCloud, Apple Music, Spotify, wherever it is you listen to music. And If you can't find me, hit me up. I will happily give you a link.
Bet. All right. Thank you so much for coming on, bro. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll see everybody on the next one.